President-elect Trump will face a full inbox of geopolitical issues when he takes office next month. And here to take us through that inbox is Richard Haass. He is of Centerview Partners, where he's senior counselor. He, of course, ran the Council on Foreign Relations for some 20 years. Okay, so first of all, start with what President Biden has left over for President Trump to deal with.
Well, I think what he's left, or what's in the inbox, are a lot of good relations with America's allies, who are our partners around the world. You've obviously got conflict in Europe that is unresolved. You've got a very difficult relationship with China, this country's principal, I don't know if you want to call it adversary or competitor in the world. You've got a Middle East that's gone through an extraordinarily difficult, 15 months, though we can talk about it in some ways. There's signs of a significant strategic improvement. You got a world that's getting warmer. You've got a world where trade relations are having difficulty because there's no longer global trade talks. The mechanisms for dealing with trade are, shall we say, impaired. And you've also got not just strong countries, in some cases which have aligned, China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, but you've also got any number of weak countries in the world, David, that can't meet many of the responsibilities of being a functioning state.
A fair number of challenges in there. Let's talk about possible opportunities. Start with the Middle East that you referred to. Is there a possible opportunity for the new President Trump actually to come in and bring some peace to that region that we haven't seen?
Absolutely, and I got to tell you, David, I don't often pair the words opportunity and Middle East, so this is something of a first for me. But yeah, I could see several opportunities. Probably the most significant might be between the United States and Iran. Iran is on its heels. It's lost much of the help it got from Hezbollah, no longer poses a serious threat to Israel. Iran also has to deal with the change of regime in Syria. Hamas has militarily been grounded down. And also Israel's demonstrated its ability to attack Iran with near impunity. So I think there's a real opportunity for the United States to approach Iran and say, hey, we want to get you out of the nuclear weapons business once and for all. We want to stop your program, make it verifiable what you have and don't have. And second of all, we want to end your support for proxies, for Hezbollah, for Hamas, for the Houthis who have interfered with shipping. And if they'll do that, we can then say, then we can talk about, for example, relaxing sanctions. But I think that's a major opportunity. I think at some point also there's an opportunity to get a ceasefire in Gaza, to get many, if hopefully all of the remaining hostages back. And then it's really up to the administration, the new administration, to what extent they then want to build on any of that and try to advance the Israeli-Palestinian process.
Let's turn to Ukraine and Russia. What's going on there? Once again, is there a possible opportunity there for the incoming President Trump to actually bring an end to that war?
Once again, I'm going to surprise both of us. I think there is. I think it's poised potentially not for peace, not for a resolution of all the disputes, but for a ceasefire in place, essentially. The United States essentially is telling Ukraine, and the people around Donald Trump are telling them, we'll continue to help you, but only if you accept a ceasefire in place. Ukraine is now willing pretty much to do that. And hopefully then we can convince Mr. Putin to say essentially to him, look, we're going to continue arming Ukraine so long as they're willing to compromise. Are you willing to compromise? And maybe this combination of the war losses that Russia suffered, plus their deteriorating economy, might just set things up, again, not for peace, but for a ceasefire that would save an awful lot of lives and money and material, and among other things, allow Ukraine to start to rebuild.
The Middle East and Ukraine are important, but China, in many ways, may be the big issue, not just for next year, but for many years to come. What are the opportunities and challenges for President Trump coming in with China?
I don't see a whole lot of opportunities, I'll be honest. Sometimes in foreign policy, David, it's not what you try to accomplish, it's what you try to avoid. So I would think the real goal with China ought to be to avoid a massive trade confrontation, to avoid a flare-up or worse in the South China Sea, obviously more than anything else to avoid a war over Taiwan. If we can do all of those things and have an uneasy but relationship, but still with a floor, I'll feel pretty good.
What about that trade conflict? Because obviously the incoming President Trump has made no secret of the fact he likes tariffs, and particularly high tariffs on China. Isn't he almost committed to pursuing that? Because it's not just him, it's not just Republicans. Democrats, to a large degree, have been backing that as well.
100%. And we've already got lots of tariffs and sanctions in place vis-a-vis China, in part because, among other things, the Chinese are subsidizing certain exports, electric vehicles, various batteries, and so forth. The Biden administration just applied a whole new layer of tariffs this past September. That's on top of the Trump tariffs they never got rid of over the last 4 years. Look, this is a difficult relationship. But that said, if the Chinese essentially continue to commit to export-led growth, I think it's inevitable that we are going to require all sorts of new tariffs to deal with that. And then secondly, I think you have to accept the reality that anything dealing with technology is going to be limited, whether it's investment there, their investment here, transfer of technology.
To what extent is the immigration issue we have in this country also a national security issue?
Well, it is in several ways, in terms of its all these people coming in, 8 million or so illegal people coming into the United States, or people coming in illegally over the last 4 years. It's a tremendous drain on public resources. Also, though, I think it has another effect. It's a distraction in the sense people say, how can we be active in the world when we have all these problems at home? And the answer is we have to be both, but it's much, much harder to generate political consensus for the United States leading or acting in the world if people see the domestic problems of this scale. So it feeds this retrenchment or even isolationism. So I think an open border, if you will, is problematic on its merits, but it's also problematic for its knock-on effects.
Two challenges that President-elect Trump will have in common with other global leaders are the growing influence of AI and the effects of climate change.
AI is something that's going to affect just about everything in terms of economic growth and performance, which then has a knock-on effect on geopolitics. It could directly affect geopolitics as it makes its way into weapon systems. All that said, I think the chance of having what you might call an arms control regime for AI is approximately zero. It's too much happening, it's too dynamic, it's happening in too many places, there's too many potential upsides to think that the United States and China, who are the two most important actors in this area, are going to somehow get together and say, okay, we're going to agree we can only do this and we can't do that. That's a pipe dream.
We did get to arms control and nuclear weapons after we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, where we came close to blowing up the planet. Should what you just said give us pause that we need to get to some sort of a crisis with generative AI before we can have that kind of arms control agreement?
I don't think so. I think, again, it's too decentralized. Unlike the nuclear programs, which were highly centralized, AI is happening in so many places, much, much more difficult to corral it. Also, it's much more central to the economy. Nuclear weapons and even nuclear power were pretty off to the side. It's pretty siloed, no pun intended there. I simply don't see it as being ripe for an arms control-like framework.
Another issue that we might not normally think of as geopolitical, but is climate. Where are we on climate, and how could that impinge on our activities geopolitically?
I think climate change continues unless we come up with some new technologies that really fundamentally change the situation. It's going to generate more refugees. It's going to make all sorts of problems for where people live within certain countries. So it's going to be a factor. I think for the near term, David, it's more of an economic factor, more of a human factor than a geopolitical factor.
Global markets so far have looked past recent tensions around the globe. A 2023 JP Morgan Private Bank report found that investors were more concerned about geopolitical events than they were about upcoming U.S. elections, even though historically geopolitics have had little or no impact on long-term returns. But Haas thinks that business leaders and market participants can't afford to ignore these risks any longer.
Things have gone well in the markets, and things tend to go well until they don't. And a lot of the things we're talking about, even the Middle East, the conflicts there have been localized. They've not been global in their implications, and the price of oil in recent months has actually come down. The Russia-Ukraine crisis has again been pretty localized. Something between the U.S. and China over Taiwan would be, shall we say, something very, very different. I also think that a lot of the people in the business world have trouble taking what you and I are talking about and plugging it into their calculations. It doesn't easily fit with a deck or something like that. Which is odd because they've just gotten through COVID. They've seen what happened with interruption in supply chains and so forth. But I think they're coming around to it. More and more firms, quite honestly, have done what I work with Centerview Partners. You're seeing other firms beginning to, one way or another, tap into geopolitical expertise. I think it's harder and harder to think of the business world operating apart from politics. We talked about the U.S. and China on technology. If you're in that business and China is an important market for you, there's no way you can operate, much less plan, apart from thinking about the geopolitical considerations that'll affect Chinese policy as well as American policy.